So I've been asked by some of my students who are studying the USA A Divided Union for a little bit of clarification on some of the key early civil rights groups. So what I thought I'd do is just go over a few of those today and very quickly talk about their aims and their methods and some of the effects of some of those groups. So I thought we could do the Naacp, CORE, basically what a Dixiecrat is, although it's not a civil rights group, it's a key term that we need to be aware of. The Montgomery Improvement Association, the Sclc, and the SNCC, or SNCC. Okay, so there's quite a few, but there's not masses to know for each of them, really. So the first is the Naacp. It's the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People. National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People. But you can call it the Naacp, it's fine. Now, it was founded in 1909. It was multiracial, African Americans and white Americans. Its aim, essentially, to start with, was to ensure political, social, economic equality for all people, and particularly to end racial discrimination and racial hatred. Okay? Its methods, very key, this one. It used legal methods. It found cases, it took them through the courts, and it got cases won and set what we call a legal precedent, P-R-E-C-E-D-E-N-T, precedent, which means the first time a legal decision has been made about an issue, and that then becomes an example for all future cases like that. All right. So they would find test cases and establish a legal precedent by challenging them in the courts. That could be federal courts, or at its very highest level, the Supreme Court. Okay. Now, it was very instrumental in the Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, and also in the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Okay. It's very, very important in all those legal challenges to segregation and discrimination. Key guy there is a man called Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall. It's a cool name. All right, it's a cool guy. Now, World War II was a key turning point for the Naacp. In 1940, before America joined the war, it had only about 50,000 members. But during the war, membership increased and political activism for African Americans increased. And it grew in 1945 to be 450,000. So from 50 to 450,000 members. It's really key. The effect of the Naacp is obviously the legal challenges, but also it encouraged African Americans to become much more active in civil rights and civil rights campaigns. So the Naacp is cool. Second key one is CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. Started in 1942, again during World War II, by a man called James Farmer, very important man in civil rights. He was inspired by the work of Mahatma Gandhi in India and essentially a non-violent protest. His aim, or the aim of CORE, was to end segregation in those southern Jim Crow states. Now, the methods were things like sit-ins in cinemas and restaurants, and trying to highlight segregation, and it was actually very successful in ending it in some of the northern cities, not the Jim Crow states down in the south. All right, so CORE, very important. Now, one of the problems that African Americans faced in terms of getting civil rights was opposition in Congress, and one of the groups that opposed them are called Dixiecrats, D-I-X-I-E-C-R-A-T-S, one word, D-I-C-I-E, as in Dixie, as in southern states, Crats, C-R-A-T-S. Now, they were Southern Democrat Party politicians. They belonged to the Democrat Party, but they represented the Jim Crow states. And they did not want to challenge segregation or the Jim Crow laws in the South, and they opposed various means to address segregation and discrimination in the South. All right, Dixiecrats. Right. Then we kind of get into the 50s, and this is the kind of the more famous sort of stuff. Obviously, we've all heard of Martin Luther King. If we haven't, then you need to read your book pretty quick, okay? So, Martin Luther King. Now, 1955, there's a very famous case called the Montgomery Bus Boycott. I'll do a video on it, but it's very straightforward. It's amazing, amazing piece of history. Now, December 1955, the Montgomery Bus Boycott occurred, and Montgomery, a town in Alabama, set up, the African Americans there set up the Montgomery Improvement Association, or MIA, okay, to oversee the boycott and to sort of keep it going, keep its momentum going, maintain it. Now, they chose Martin Luther King Jr., who was a brand new Baptist minister to the area, which kind of meant he was unknown to the sort of the police and the authorities and stuff. But he was also a very intelligent man. He was very educated, very articulate, amazing speaker. And so he was a Baptist minister, and he was chosen to lead the Montgomery Improvement Association. Now, the Montgomery Bus Boycott, one effect of that was it raised the profile of Martin Luther King. Okay. And then he went after the Montgomery Bus Boycott, he went on to create or co-found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC. I have to really think about that one. Okay, it's no wonder my students are getting a little bit confused by it. So Martin Luther King starts with the MIA, and then he goes to the SCLC. All right. So the next one is obviously the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Set up straight after the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Martin Luther King became the president of it in 1957. Now, it became probably the dominant civil rights group. While the NAACP was challenging things in law courts, the SCLC was organising more also on-the-street protests. So, they believed in non-violent protests still, just like CORE, and they wanted to end segregation and discrimination. All right. Now, their methods was they learned the methods of the Montgomery Bus Boycott, and essentially they learned that solidarity, i.e. African Americans all working together for a purpose, and unity refusing to be broken up, was incredibly powerful. The power of African Americans working together could create change. So what they did was they found examples of discrimination, and they went and raised the profile of them. So they went to certain places. You'll see them later on in future videos. And whilst the SCLC was raising the issue and the media profile of these things, the NAACP was often challenging that same piece of discrimination in the law courts. All right. So then what you get sort of later on, start of the 60s, you start to get a bit more student protest, and we get the SNCC, or SNCC, S-N-I-C-K, it's pronounced, but you call it the SNCC, the Student Non-Violent Coordinating Committee. Okay, Student Non-Violent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. Started at Shaw University in a place in North Carolina. It got a bit of help from the SCLC. It got some money from about $800 loan, I think it was. Not a loan, sorry, a gift to set up their protest and their organisation. Their first chairman was a person called Marion Barry, and its aim was to end segregation, but also, very important, to increase voter registration for African Americans. In order to vote in the US, in most countries, in all countries I think, you actually have to be almost called the voter voting register. You have to register with the government that you are legally entitled to vote, and then when you go to vote, they tick your name off. But you have to register before you vote. You cannot just turn up on voting day. Now, many African Americans had not registered to vote, or they had been prevented from registering to vote. And if they couldn't vote, they couldn't choose the politicians, so those politicians would not change laws to help improve civil rights. Okay. Now, so the SNCC wanted to end segregation and increase voter registration, and it wanted to end segregation with the methods it used were things like sit-ins, freedom rides, the March on Washington, and in terms of voter registration, the SNCC was incredibly important in the Freedom Summer of 1964. There'll be other videos on these events. So, really, you just got to know NAACP, CORE, be aware of what a Dixiecrat is, the MIA, the SCLC, and the SNCC. All right, I hope that clarifies it. If not, maybe just replay it, go and read your book afterwards, and I hope that helps.